This is HR in Review, a podcast dedicated to HR thought leadership, actionable advice, and all the latest developments in human resource management.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to our newest episode of our podcast, HR in Review. I'm Monica Sharma, the editor of HRreview, and if you haven't tuned in before, in this short segment we'll be looking back at some recent standout stories and we'll be discussing the most relevant topics linked to HR. Each week will be based around a different theme, and this week's is the 4-day work week and the challenges and benefits it brings. Here today, I'm joined by my guest, Perry Timms. Perry is founder and chief energy officer at People and Transformational HR, a design, development and change consultancy which was set up in 2012. Alongside this, Perry is a renowned blogger and global speaker on the transformative power of HR professionals. Perry, thank you so much for joining us today. It's great to have you on the show. How are you?
Thank you, Monica. I'm well, and it's delightful to be here. So, thank you for the inclusion.
No worries at all. So I just wanted to kick off the show by talking a little bit about People and Transformational HR and your own experience in setting up a 4-day work week. So just to make our audience aware, People and Transformational HR is a gold standard accredited employer in regards to their 4-day work week, which means that the company operates on a permanent 32-hour 4-day week basis with no loss of pay. So Perry, I guess I'd love to just start off by talking about what prompted you to make the decision to move from a kind of more conventional way of working to a 4-day work week. It would be great to hear a little bit about what was happening at the consultancy at the time and what factors might have convinced you to make this decision.
Thanks, Monica. Yeah, so I guess there's a catalytic version of this where we made the decision in July, but there's also a long-standing thought of mine about the inequity of a 5-day working week, and I'll come on to that a little bit too. But the actual catalyst was the COVID-19 response, actually, because we had just expanded to 8 people from 3. So in the beginning of 2020, we'd sort of doubled and a bit more. And then in March, of course, the world shut down and we lost all our work. And we took a decision to not just sit on our hands. We took a decision to look at the way we needed to, position our products and services for people who were similarly locked down and needed to adapt and change. And it was pretty exhausting work. And I noticed that we were putting lots of hours in, but we probably weren't feeling as efficient as we could be. So I tabled the issue of, shall we try to do things in a 4-day week to give us a punctuation? That was the important word, punctuation, which is why we chose Wednesdays. So we were going to work Monday, Tuesday, off Wednesday, back Thursday, Friday to give us that re-energized feel. And the team went, yeah, let's give it a go. We didn't know how it would go. We started to experiment. Quite quickly, I personally felt incredibly different. I felt myself having a real sense of energy towards the end of the week. And I suddenly found myself coping with an increased workload, which was nice because we were starting to recover. But I didn't feel like I needed to go back in and stretch it out over 5 days again. So we stuck with 4 days, and we surveyed the team during the course of it. We made sure people's inputs were there, and everybody came back with the same conclusion. It's like, I like this midweek break. I can do things, life admin, yoga, painting, whatever it might be, but I come back with a renewed energy on Thursday. And what I think I would describe it as is we took it away from being a mathematical equation of hours equaling success, and we created a bit more quantum physics where it was about what do you do with those hours rather than just clocking at the time. So just to give you a sense of where we are now, we are 120% up on work, which is incredible, and we're so happy about that. But we are 20% down on the amount of hours we put in to do that, and that shouldn't compute. So I think it was an experiment that's revealed itself to be very sustainable, and we are much more inclined to continue with it, to the point that obviously you invited me to talk about it. The bigger issue, I'll only briefly touch on this, is I facilitated a discussion in the public sector about the challenges of working parents and women in leadership roles. And what seemed to surface was that they were fighting against full-time colleagues who were male. And it all of a sudden felt like it wasn't their inability, it was the system, that they were working 3 days, other people were working 5 because the role was built for 5, and there was no way to meet those two things together. And I just held this unfairness until this 4-day option came in, and I thought, if everybody's working 4, 3 to 4 is not such a big transition. So there's a bigger moral thing here as well.
So there's a lot of really interesting points you've raised there, Perry.
Yeah.
So you've obviously mentioned that it's kind of a result of the pandemic. Everyone was feeling a bit burnt out and not being as productive as they could. When you first started this out, did you intend for this to be a permanent solution, or was it meant to be more of a temporary measure to kind of cope with the pandemic?
Follow us on Twitter at HRreview or join us on LinkedIn and Facebook.
It was experimental, absolutely. We didn't put a set timeline to it. We just thought we would see how it goes, quite literally. But we wanted to make sure that we were aware of the implications of it, both in our revenue and how people felt. So at the same time as going down in hours, we introduced a much tighter way of defining how we work and what on. So we introduced what we call a resource allocation process, where we look at what do we spend time on, what value do we create during that. And I tell you what it did, is it forced people to stop being indulgent about booking an internal meeting for an hour that could be done in a very different way. So we got a bit brutal on internal meeting times, and we created a lot more of what we call asynchronous exchanges. We would chat on an open platform like Slack. We would record a video or audio file, and we effectively dispersed a meeting into a number of exchanges. And all of a sudden, we found ourselves quite literally with about an hour at least per day more, because we weren't doing that. So that was a mathematic thing. But we really wanted to see how people felt. And that was the real plus point. People were all coming back on Thursday absolutely bounding with energy, whereas before Thursday was a really hard day. So we think we've managed to create this better rhythm. That's how I'd describe it.
That's actually very interesting, because I think there's been a lot of talk about how meetings have kind of, blown up over the pandemic, how people are spending more time just sitting in front of Zoom and kind of different calls. So the fact that you've managed to kind of mitigate that and improve productivity is really amazing to hear. So
Thanks.
Just to move on to kind of our next point, what happened when you first began the trial? You've obviously reported kind of good benefits. Were these immediate, or did they take a bit more time to see?
The benefits took a while, I'll absolutely admit to that. But do you know what was really probably the founding principle of it, is that we weren't tempted to work on a Wednesday. So we pretty much said, do not log on. We will not be on Slack. We will not be doing work on a Wednesday. We made it quite firm that we didn't want to see that. And so, if you want, that was the very intentional part of this, just to break the habit, I think. Now, I took the opportunity to read more, because I was missing out on learning stimulus from reading, right? And there were days when I'd read 3 books, and I loved it because I felt enriched and nourished, and that gave me an incentive to not dip back into work. So I think we all found a way to break the habit. That was the first probably important lesson we learned. And then the second lesson we learned was we were probably a bit concerned about culture. Will our culture suddenly start to become something that's a little bit fragmented by the fact that we're not together all the time, right? So we very deliberately started to talk about how we felt, what was going on, what work we were doing. And as a result of it, we created something called a team agreement, where we all said, this is how we'll conduct ourselves. This is what you can expect from me. Now, we hadn't had it prior to this, but we felt it framed what we expected from each other. And it was a terrific, advantageous, I guess you'd say, coming together that helped us create those bureaucratic killing devices that stopped us getting indulgent and slipping back into bad ways. So I think we named things. We narrated them, we held firm, and we made them very real and tangible. And I think that helped us.
So that's really interesting. Not only did you go in there with kind of a well-being focus, and it seems from what you're reporting that it did improve well-being, but it also actually helped to kind of strengthen the company culture at a time where, lots of companies were reporting that it had eroded.
Yeah, I sensed there was a bit of cultural fragmentation because we were working so hard. So it was an antidote to that. And people will say, but you can't fix culture, by a program. And I kind of agree, but you can fix culture when you focus on it, narrate it, bring it in, make adjustments. Because I think culture gets good by, a multitude of actions and deeds and so on. And it also gets bad by the same measure, not so good ones. So we just wanted to make sure we were putting all the good ones back in. So, and I would say, 14, 15 months in, our culture is stronger than it ever has been.
Amazing. Wow. So obviously you've spoken a little bit about the benefits that you've kind of stumbled across. Were there any challenges that you faced while implementing a 4-day work week?
If you have any comments on the HR in Review podcast, would like to suggest a topic or speaker, or provide other feedback, you can contact us using the email podcast@hrreview.co.uk. We look forward to hearing from you.
The biggest challenge is clients, because our clients don't work a 4-day working week, right? So they would come to us and say, hey, can you do a workshop on a Wednesday? And of course, we're completely and utterly reliant on their revenue to exist. So we did do a bit of a declaration to our clients at first. We set out of office messages and we told them that's what we were doing. Now, two things really interestingly happened there. One is, if a client did message us on a Wednesday, they actually apologised for it. Which was incredible. Yeah, and some of them said, I wish I had a 4-day week too. We did have to make some concessions. So we did bend a little bit. And if the client was absolutely stuck and could only do a Wednesday, somebody like me would say, okay, well, I'll sacrifice my Wednesday, but I'll perhaps claim the time back on Friday afternoon or something. So I did a little bit of more flexing, probably more than the rest of the team, because I'm normally the one in the delivery element of it. But yeah, mostly clients we thought would be really anti it, but actually quite the opposite. So yeah, we learned that. That was a challenge. I think the other challenge we thought is, if we stop on a Wednesday, will it take us longer to rev back up again on a Thursday after a stop? But actually quite the opposite. And I think Wednesdays are more favourable than perhaps having an extended weekend, because I imagine an extended weekend is harder to rev back up again.
Yeah.
But a midweek punctuation isn't. So I think we're comfortable, if not even sort of very dogmatic now, about Wednesday being our day.
That's interesting as well, because I think a lot of instances where I've heard, the 4-day kind of work week being adopted is actually on the Friday, giving employees a long weekend.
No, we love Fridays. They're still a celebration day because of the weekend coming in. So we joke that we have a Friday 1.0 and a Friday 2.0. Right. So we get both. So actually Tuesdays is not a horrible day anymore, because we know it's the day before we're off again. It psychologically creates a very different frame of reference. Yeah.
Really interesting. So actually, just on that point, I wanted to touch quickly upon, this isn't something that you raised as a challenge, but it's something that I've heard, which is that a lot of people are worried about the kind of stress levels, given that obviously there's a short amount of working time. So will employees be forced to do, more in the same amount or in a shorter period of time?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that, because that did come up. We did wonder whether we were creating more intensity and pressure around the days we were on versus not. So we were very acutely aware of that, but we genuinely didn't know the answer to that until we tried. So we were very willing to go into it and see how it felt. And I think we very quickly realised that those days on were not crammed, intense, awful experiences. Quite the opposite. We were very optimal about what we wanted to do with that time, because it kind of felt like it was tighter for us. So we wanted to make the most out of them. But you know what? At the same time as we did this, we also instigated and continued with something where we spend 1 hour per Tuesday learning something as a team. So we bring in a guest speaker, we do something ourselves, and we didn't sacrifice that. We kept that. So I think it's important that we don't think that it is all about losing things instead. It's about making them fit in a different way. So I think holding on to those things made us think we weren't sacrificing anything or putting undue pressure on ourselves. And as I say, we then emerged into different rhythms, and our attack points, if you want to call them that, weren't on ourselves. It was on the way we worked and the systems we operated in. So we focused on those and we tuned them up so nicely. That's why we've got that 120% uptick, but 20% down on hours.
So obviously it's been a really great success for your company. If businesses out there are considering implementing a 4-day work week, what are some of the practicalities that you'd encourage them to think about?
Why not subscribe to the premium version of HR in Review? You'll get ad-free content, early and extra episodes and more. Even better, although it's the premium edition, it's absolutely free. Sign up at hrreview.co.uk/podcast.
Well, I think people have got to want it for a start. because there are some people who absolutely just love being on all the time and then love their weekends. They seem to have developed this almost like yin yang type personality. So they might find it a bit of an intrusion. Yeah.
Right.
So I think find the intent first, and see how it goes. And I think it does require an enormous amount of kind of co-constructing, really. People need to have their input, say, influence, shape, that kind of thing. And they might not know how. So you might have to support them.
Right.
In recalibrating their workloads, not being too punishing with their diary, learning how to say no or not yet, those kind of things. So I think there are some skills involved in it too. But I think the crucial thing is obsess about your working systems, and not everybody has done that before. So again, I think you might need to help them do that individually, team, and then obviously with the whole organisation in mind. And then never lose sight of the fact that you're still serving customers and suppliers and partners and so on. So don't create something that you feel is going to create some unnecessary tension with them. But equally, don't let that stop you from doing it, because our experience is clients were utterly supportive of it and actually envious.
Right.
Yeah.
Amazing. So speaking of trialling a 4-day work week, I now wanted to kind of move on to our second story, which is about Scotland testing out a 4-day work week with no loss of pay. So the Scottish government have announced a pilot scheme that's in really early stages. It would cost about £10 million, but could ultimately help companies explore the benefits and costs linked to kind of shifting to a 4-day work week. So as part of this, IPPR Scotland has urged the Scottish government to extend their pilot across a range of sectors, including non-office workplaces, shift workers, kind of social care settings, the NHS and hospitality. So obviously most of the companies that have trialled a 4-day work week so far have been ones that have had a more traditional or conventional background. How can other industries be included in this, especially ones which operate on a much larger scale, so over 250 employees, or have more shift work?
Yeah, I think this is the real acid test for this, isn't it? I absolutely recognise where you're coming from this. So I think the first thing to say is that all of those huge organisations are made up of smaller units. And so therefore, if you're a 50,000 strong organisation and you don't want to suddenly flick a switch and go to 4 days and have to deal with some kind of chaotic reaction to it, don't do that. Find a place that's demonstrative enough of what it would look like if you scaled it, but in a very contained environment, and just trial it for a quarter, because a quarter, I think, is probably enough time for people to change their habits, to get to understand the data, to see the implications of it and make the adjustments. And so from that experiment, you can then look at the data, look at the methods, look at the approaches and think, we've got a replicable model here, and then start thinking about how to scale it. So you don't have to do it all in one go. I think that's really important to urge people to think about. You can run parallel experiments, of course, with different divisions, logistics and customer service and data analytics teams and tech and whatever. You can run multiple if you want to. But I think start small, build your evidence base, get to know what this means both from a human and a systems perspective, and then use that to create a more certain replication of it. And I can imagine there'll be some people going, well, look, I'm in logistics. I can't even recruit lorry drivers now if I wanted to. And you're now asking me to take them off to do 4-day weeks. What am I going to do with that? That's a massive issue. So it might be there are some areas that are perhaps just a bit too hard right now to do. But I think, you might need to ask yourself, well, are some people put off of lorry driving because it is such a slog in terms of hours? Do you know what I mean? And if you create a shorter burst of it, will you appeal and attract people who are semi-retired, who might want to come back, and so on and so forth? See what I mean? So it's not as simple as ruling it out just because you've got a labour shortage. It's like, if we open up to a different model, can we actually use that as an incentive to attract different people to the roles? So I think experiment again with that. So don't put yourself in a position where you deny them because it feels too hard and complex and you've got existing challenges. Use those challenges to say, is this part of the solution? And then experiment into it.
And finally, Perry, I had one last question, which is, obviously you've talked a bit about labour shortages and kind of reflecting on the current world. Should companies implement a 4-day working week in a post-pandemic world? I mean, this is happening at a time where many companies are reverting back to going to the offices, their traditional hours, and are feeling really uncertain due to the pandemic. So should companies take on this task of creating a 4-day work week?
So I think the argument for that is that people are under an immense amount of pressure, stress, uncertainty, intensity, and so on because of the pandemic. And then if you are suddenly asking people to go back to a thing that they were doing before, after recalibrating their lives, that is something that might be damaging. So a 4-day operation within that might give people the chance to go, but at least it's different. I've got this bit that I can hold on to, and I'm not expected to do what I did before in a condition I'm not comfortable with. So it could be part of the solution to soften the blow, if you want to call it that.
Right.
The other side, the argument against it is, if you've got more pressure, intensity, and arguably more work, you're thinking to yourself, it's just madness to try and do this. We need everybody to put in more rather than less. But I think that's a false argument, because people will burn out and you'll lose them, and then you're in a worse position than before. So I'd say heed my experience of this, which is stop looking at it mathematically and think more quantum. If your people are better supported and cared for, and they can balance their lives more, you'll get more out of them in the time you have, even if you shorten it, than you would do even in the long run. I think there's some research on neuroscience that says actually the brain is only optimal for about 2 hours a day, as in its peak performance. So we endure people to 10, 14-hour days. It's not sensible. So I think if we want to get the best out of people, that's how we do it. We shorten it and we make it more productive and purposeful.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Perry, for joining me on this episode and talking to us about how your company have implemented a 4-day week. And I'm so glad to hear that it's been really successful for you. So I think this case study will prove really useful for other companies who may be looking to do the same.
Thank you.
As already mentioned, Perry can be reached at People and Transformational HR. To our audience, as always, if you're interested in learning more about the 4-day work week, HR strategy, or any other topic linked to HR, head over to our website, HRreview.co.uk. Thanks once again to Perry for joining us and our audience for listening. We hope to see you next time, where we will be continuing the discussion on the most relevant HR topics. See you then.
The HR in Review podcast is brought to you by HRreview.co.uk. HRreview.co.uk is a website dedicated to human resources and related professionals. News items are posted daily, together with analysis looking in depth at topical HR issues. You can sign up for our range of specialist newsletters at hrreview.co.uk/sign-up and follow us on Twitter at HRreview, or join us on LinkedIn and Facebook. Thank you for listening.